Welcome to the Heroic Voice. I am here with Dave Law and how do you pronounce your name, Chris?
Calzia.
Calzia, Chris Calzia, the creators of the Space Odditorium, which follows the adventures of Major Trauma in a sort of odd dystopian Earth that's been invaded by aliens. And Major Trauma is, as I understand it, possibly the last human survivor. Is that the case? This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators and other interesting people on a variety of subjects. I am Dennis Maloney, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we feature good girl and bad girl artwork, super babes, and all kinds of Silver Agey style stories.
Sounds pretty good. Chris, why don't
Alrighty.
you take that?
Alrighty. So
Well,
let's get going on this. It is, what is today? It's May 24th, 2025. Your latest volume is just out. So let's go back and come up with an explanation for how you came up with this concept, please.
okay. I think it was probably around 2017 that Dave, hit me up and said, I want to create a comic book and wanted to do something science fiction. And he just started doing illustrations, involving sort of like this girl in this sci-fi setting with a robot. And then I think we just kind of like we expanded upon it from there. We just came up with we wanted to create something that was just completely weird and bizarre and that was fun to read as a comic book then, and something that would fit into the comic book medium, then too. And by that I mean just kind of go outrageous and outlandish and do all kinds of bizarre and weird ideas.
Let me interrupt for a second. It just occurs to me, Chris, are you doing this on a phone?
Yes, I am.
Could you turn it sideways?
Sure.
See if that does
Okay.
anything. There we go.
Is that better for you?
That gives us a much better view of you. Thank you. Thank you
Okay.
very much. Dave, let's get your take on this.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I had recently been doing something totally unrelated to comic books and decided it was time to take a career change and jump into making comic books. So, I knew my drawing was strong, but I had my doubts on my writing, and I knew had worked with Chris before when we were in college. We had made a real do-it-yourself mini comic zine type deal for a little bit that we sold to our local comic shop, and so we had a lot of fun with that book. And so I thought, yeah, he'd be a good person to talk to about coming up with a story. And he'd been working on being a screenplay writer, and still, and so I knew he could write a good script. So we talked. We kind of I showed him some images I was working on, and it's funny because I think at the time he was doing a lot of like darker kind of detective story type script writing, and he took this like hard left with this story. And I was kind of expecting kind of a more serious science fiction story, just because that's what I had in my head. But he went with this really weird, oddball kind of sci-fi that I realized is really is what I wanted to draw, and so I was always really appreciative of how he kind of brought that to the table, and it's definitely kind of makes sense because he's kind of in this different frame and kind of made this change into sci-fi, so he kind of came up with something that I think is not out there, not something kind of science fiction that I'm not seeing that much of.
Where did the name come from?
I don't know.
Wow, yeah, I can't.
I don't know. Yeah,
Feels
I
like
think
this
we
is.
wanted to do something space. We're like I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Auditorium popped up. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
you were
I
from.
think I was
Yeah.
listening to a lot of David Bowie at the time, and I think I
Okay.
remember really loving it was a song by him, the
Space
Oddity.
Odyssey. Yeah.
And then also at the same time, I was listening to Dandy Warhols, which is a much more modern band, and they had a song, they had an album called "Welcome to the Auditorium," I believe. And so I think those two are very much in my head. And me and Chris are big music buffs. We both love a lot of types of music, and actually, how our relationship actually started is through music. So the book, I mean, has been always music has been a big influencer on it, and so it kind of made sense to do that for the title.
Okay. The concept, right? You're going from a world where humanity has kind of been obliterated into stuff that's humorous and amusing. Right? It's kind of a
You know,
sideways step.
it's just all part of our dark and twisted minds.
Well, there's precedent for that, right? A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You
Yes.
know,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah.
Earth is completely obliterated, and that's where the
Let's look.
story begins.
Yeah, let's look on the bright side of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. And I feel like the Space Auditorium, then, too, despite its wackiness and just how it doesn't take itself so seriously as a comic book, yet there are serious themes in it, then, too. So we kind of have this chance to be able to explore some of those things.
I think that's the best approach to it. I often
Sure.
step into that mode myself, right? And
Yeah.
underlying whatever, humor may be going on, there's always some serious theme there. Um,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
and I think that just dates back to the history of comics then too. I mean, for Spider-Man, you've got a boy that is partially arachnid, but yet it explores what it is to be a teenager and becoming an adult then too.
well, pretty much all of Stan and Jack's stuff had those sub themes in it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Sergeant Fury is basically a grown up boy band, right? Boy gang.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Jack always dealt with that theme, whether he was doing the Newsboy Legion or, the Boy Commandos or Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. You make them a little bit older, but that's basically what they were. They were, if you look at them, that's a step forward. So you're going into, the theme, which actually appears in comics a lot, of
Yeah.
the world having changed in some way, not necessarily destroyed, but it's a different world. Right. Um,
Yeah.
if I understand it correctly, Major Trauma, another
Uh-huh.
good name. Um, how did you decide on that for your lead character, given that
Major
that's a girl?
trauma.
Major Trauma seems not a girl's name.
I mean, we wanted to be this comic is kind of about being on the nose, while also being able to just explore sort of like some of the subtleties of sort of like some of those themes then too. So with a name like Major Trauma, of course, this girl has her problems then too. So it's like, but yet we also wanted to kind of give her a militant kind of name then also. And I think I take the major element from it from Ghost in the Shell. There's major, I forget her name, but the lead character in Ghost in the Shell is a major of some kind then also. So just put those things together. Major, and she's got trauma. Major trauma.
All right. And your take on that, Dave?
Yeah, I think with that, a lot of that kind of stuff, we just kind of rolled with the things that sounded fun and sounded inspiring, and especially when it was like, Chris's idea and for me to illustrate it. I think that was kind of what was really fun with this book is I kind of feel like we let each other really explore and play around with our part of the story quite a bit. And so he has this in the script, and I'm like, okay, let's how do I visually interpret that for people, and this character that's like that, and I think Major Trauma actually too was one of the sketches that I had originally kind of given Chris
Yeah.
when we were just kind of brainstorming what we would do. I had just a lot of different images that I was playing around with, and just doing a lot of drawing. And I think there was an image of this girl standing next to this like robot type. I think the image was more about the robot, but he kind of leaned onto the girl that was just kind of hanging out next to him. That I was kind of in my mind was like, oh, I don't know, this
Yeah,
extra element.
characters sometimes
Yeah.
just come out of sketches, and that happened with the X Thieves, right? It happened with my own character, the G Girl. The G Girl was originally just a sketch of a girl wearing a G-shaped bathing suit, right? So,
Right.
yeah, so that's characters come from sometimes. Now, you have the name of the project. When
Mhm.
did the name of the lead character come in? Was that before or after you actually started working on the book?
I think That, yeah, usually when it comes to sort of like to writing the scripts, I do sort of like try to come up with the names and the characters. And I certainly don't do a whole like backstory on the characters. I certainly don't know everything about them before I start writing the script. And I think we were kind of piecing it together as we were going along, especially during that first volume then too. Um, so I think I come up with a name, I come up with a general concept or idea for the character and who she is, but then just immediately start writing and see where it takes us from there.
Mhm. So let's talk about the first book that you did. What
Mhm.
happens in volume one of the Space Auditorium?
I can't remember what happens, Dave.
No, I was going to actually add to what he was saying, and I think that that leads into this
Oh,
question
by all
nicely.
means, go ahead.
Is like with the first story, we were the way it kind of came about was not that we sat down and had this grand theme of a story that we wanted to create and do. The first few arcs of it were really us seeing whether or not we kind of meshed or had an idea that we wanted to continue to roll with. So, the first story really is just kind of introduces you. We released them in just kind of smaller chunks. I think it's the first one was pretty short. It was only like 6 or
Yeah,
7 pages,
yeah.
and we released it on Comixology, and so that was kind of all we had really thought of at first, but then we decided to keep going with it, and each one we'd sold it for like a few bucks on Comixology at that time, and they were actually moving at a nice, at least encouraging rate for us to keep making it. So the first volume really is kind of this hodgepodge of these kind of the story, kind of really just growing and us
Yeah.
um, kind of feeling out this experiment. Uh, so therefore it has kind of a disjunct feel to it. Um,
Hmm.
but through you piece together the story of this girl who's kind of raised in captivity by a mysterious alien race, and they use her to compete in this intergalactic game show, which she's kind of a slave to. And she decides to escape, and the story really kind of blossoms from there. But this first volume is really about is that, and it's just us kind of feeling out the character, feeling out the world, and kind of that's more what we're kind of doing in that first volume.
So you're telling stories about a character that you kind of understand, but you're still trying to get a complete handle on, right? Would you say
Yeah.
that the character is there at the beginning of it and you're just developing it, or is it something that you actually came to understand as you were doing it?
I'd say we came to understand or get a better understanding of her as we did it then too. And I have to kind of admit my primary focus was not on sort of like character development. It was more about okay, the activities and the things that she's going to experience and maybe like some of the sub characters and the action involved then too. It was it's meant to be on a surface level, not a deep dive into this character then too, despite we do sort of explore some themes of humanity and a teenage girl growing up and raising a teenage girl, weird stuff like that. um it's we wanted to create a comic book that was fun, I think when I did start working on the Space Auditorium, I was really kind of burnt out on doing the screenwriting. And with screenwriting, then too, it's kind of like oftentimes story structure is so important with screenwriting. And it's kind of like you got to plot out your A's to the B to the C to the Z, all the way until the very end of the script. And that was tiresome for a writer. So I wanted to just kind of like, okay, we've got this concept, we've got these two characters, let's go see where it takes us.
Yeah, I think I approached the art in a very similar kind of reckless way. In that, when I first started making comic books, you learn these like rules that all these other previous comic book artists kind of have set in place. You pencil like this, you have these kind of panels, you use this kind of line thickness. You have to make sure you have this kind of space for this kind of action. And there's a lot of rules. And I felt really beholden to them at first when I began making comics, which I think is a good thing because it gives you a structure to start to figure it out. But I remember I got kind of burnt out trying to adhere to a lot of that structure at one point too. And with Space Auditorium, I remember distinctly going, I'm going to just try all the things that I wanted to try in a comic book, and I'm going to learn the lessons the hard way on why they don't do that anymore. Some of them I learned. Some of them I learned. And one I think is really fun and an interesting one is like in that first book, I used a lot of pencil rendering. I was really into pencils and doing a lot of delicate kind of shading and transitions and gradients with it. And I was like, I never understood why that wasn't more in comics because it really gave such a cool effect. And so
Yeah.
for a lot of these characters that are in there, they're these like holographic beings. I was like, well, that's perfect. I'll use these soft pencil renderings of them to give them this kind of ethereal vibe to them, or this kind of translucent vibe, and
Yeah.
that'll be cool. That'll be a cool effect. And it
And
was, and
was
I think
it?
it what
Was it a cool effect?
it I think so. And from a lot of the what people have said when they pick up the book and when they're looking at it, or when after
Yeah.
they've read it, they really enjoy that mixed medium
Yeah.
element that I put in there at first, and I do too. But it does take a lot longer to to do. And when when you've got, I don't know, we're gonna do 6 pages, let's see what it looks like, and you don't have a deadline, it's fine to like add on a few extra days of working on it. But once you start getting to that rhythm and you're like, okay, I want to create this story and I kind of can't keep this pacing so that I can continue the kind of energy that's moving through it, having to like a panel that would normally only take you like 20 minutes is now taking you an hour to, 2 hours to do all the delicate shading. That really that really kind of hangs things up, and I learned that from that from doing
But
that in there.
but I would say we benefit from it though too, because when we do set ourselves up at the conventions and people are just walking past, past all kinds of comic books and booths that they have no recognition or they're not familiar with, then it's something from the Space Auditorium draws them over to it, and usually it's the art. It's immediately the art that they see. They're like, "Wow, that looks really kind of cool. That's different. What is that?" And that's what kind of like that's what hooks them in, and then we explain the story and they're like, oh my god, this is bizarre, this is weird, this is well, I gotta have one. Okay, I'll try it out. Yeah.
I will say that the logo that you use is visually interesting in and of itself. Right?
Oh,
That by itself should attract attention.
Yeah.
You want something that stands out, and I think
Yeah.
that it serves that purpose for you. Um, we didn't actually cover the question that I originally asked, so let's rephrase that.
All
You
right, let's go
you
back.
have a bunch of
We're going to do a lot of that today,
essentially
Dennis.
standalone stories in volume one.
Uh,
I should ask how many stories are in that volume and what's the arc? I mean, you clearly didn't have an arc in mind when you started it, but you may very well have ended up with one because that happens.
okay. Well, you gave me, Dave, thank you. You gave me kind of like a launch pad when talking about volume one, where it's like, okay, it was able to kind of like set my mind back and familiarize myself with it then. I think volume one, those, like Dave was saying, we started off with just kind of like maybe 6 to 8 page comics that we just released on Comixology. We didn't want to go the floppy route. We wanted to just release online and see how that did, and then compile it all into a trade paperback once we got about 50 or 60 pages, because we felt we had a better chance of just, of improving our sales and gaining interest if we had a trade paperback rather than a series of floppies. So the first story arc is primarily just about Major Trauma, who is sort of like the sole survivor of Earth, and she's being held captive by this mysterious alien race, forced to compete in this intergalactic reality game show called the Space Auditorium, in which she just battles monsters and creatures and robots and all kinds of weird things that this alien race called the Stoans just kind of present to her. And it's all just sort of like entertainment for the Stoans. But then she breaks free from captivity. She meets all kinds of oddball characters like a sumo wrestler in space. She meets William S. Burroughs, who is being held captive by the alien race too, because they just think he's completely bizarre and they want to study him. And she ultimately finds at the end of the first volume, she finds what has happened to Earth. And Earth has pretty much been shrunken down to this little minuscule or smaller version of Earth, and it's being used in order to power their space station, which ultimately then powers the game show of the Space Auditorium. And that's what happens in the first volume.
Hmm. What about this Zebulon Clodpole guy?
Zebulon Clodpole. So as entertainment for
Hmm.
Major Trauma, since she's being held in the space capsule just by herself, they have to provide her with, food and entertainment just to kind of amuse her. And they think, okay, well, um, the most entertaining thing for human beings are sitcoms. So we're going to do reruns of sitcoms, just, re-show sitcoms to Major Trauma. And we hope that it's going to help kind of like guide her as a teenage girl then too, because sitcoms have wholesome family values. And they present, a sitcom that we kind of made up, but yet we kind of based off of a Full House. So we call it Pretty Vacant is the name of the sitcom, which is sort of like a title taken from a Sex Pistols song. And Zebulon Clodpole is sort of like the reiteration of Danny Tanner, played by who was that played by, Dave?
Bob Saget,
Bob Saget, yeah.
rest in peace.
And then we have all the other characters, the Full House kind of characters, then too, with different names, different iterations, but yet they resemble sort of the Full House characters. So there's a running theme throughout the Space Auditorium of like sitcom television characters returning, and they've just kind of be reiterated and revamped to become something different than too in the Space Auditorium. And yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I was obviously curious about the name. So,
And I think that bizarre idea came to me, I was working with the concept or just kind of like noodling around with the concept of like, what if humanity had ended and the only thing that was found was just sort of like cassette tapes of sitcom television. So the remnants of, whoever it is that managed to find the remnants of humanity, all they were able to find was just cassette tapes of sitcom television.
hmm.
And they based humanity or their thoughts of humanity on sitcom reruns of sitcom television.
And Dave, how did you approach that from the art side?
Oh, yeah, actually that was a lot of fun because like it gave me a lot of flexibility and freedom to kind of create visuals that really could be a lot of different things. I kind of went with this like repurposed tech kind of junky vibe to everything, like that they would have taken kind of the things that we had here and lying around and used them to create the structures and tunnels and everything that kind of create this thing called the tubeways, which is kind of the environment that the majority of the story takes place in, which is these tubeway systems that kind of surround the Earth in its kind of now new form, and these tubeways are kind of where they have these aliens and these robots and the survivors kind of still kind of exist, and this weird game show also is filmed. Um, so that was a lot of fun to kind of create, and the scale of some of the imagery where I'm drawing things viewed from deep in outer space versus inside how things would look. Uh, it I guess you could say it was challenging, but I just found it really fun. And really enjoyed a lot of the work that I was able to put into it and a lot of the designs that I was able to create.
Okay, volume one ends at some point, you know, and then you start to think about what comes next. What
Mm-hmm.
what
Yes.
is in volume two?
So I think volume two is kind of like where we started to kind of mesh a little bit better than, I think there's an improvement in the writing and also in the art then too when it comes to volume two. And you've seen evolution with the writing and the art then also as as we go on with the Space Auditorium. Volume two, then let's see. So after Major Trauma rebels and escapes captivity, then the Stoans send out a mercenary in order to try to capture her. And this mercenary is just 9 millimeters tall. He's a little tiny like bug, and he powers himself with a jetpack. Um, and he's got a stun gun then too. So he arrives on the tubeways and he shocks Major Trauma with his stun gun, which knocks her unconscious. And then through volume two, then we kind of explore the unconscious mind of Major Trauma. And when she is unconscious, her subconscious kind of appears inside of this mall complex, or a complex that the Stones, or an alternate reality that resembles the mall,
Like
because
a
they
shopping
assume
mall.
that any teenage girl, the most enjoyable place for a teenage girl, especially one of the 90s, is the mall. So she appears there. And so it's kind of like she's being held captive within this mall, you know. And I think what we're trying to explore by that, in with the sitcom television and with the mall, is just sort of like, okay, here's all these wholesome family values that are being thrown at major trauma, but yet in reality, is it really? We have sort of a cynical side and we have a dark side to ourselves. So we are exploring, okay, are those really wholesome values to be able to go to the mall, to be able to just watch sitcom television for the remainder of your life? What happens if you raise a teenage girl on those things? And it just causes her to go completely bonkers and delinquent then.
All right. She must be of value if they care about getting her back. So I take it that
Yes,
her show is rather popular among the aliens.
exactly. They want to get her back to be able to perform back in the Space Auditorium.
Okay. How much money are they making? And does she get a cut of the action?
Absolutely not.
No. Yeah, that's why she's escaping. Yeah,
So you're
they,
dealing basically with slave exploitation here as
yeah.
well as a
Yeah,
sub-theme.
yeah,
And
yeah.
sitcoms in the mall are not really adequate compensation, I would think, at least on the side.
We went, Dennis, we went absolutely bonkers with this idea,
Yeah.
and like I said, we didn't completely flesh it out. There are some strings that we still need to sort of like tie, and that there's some loose ends that we need to tie up at the end, and we're working on them.
All right. So
Yeah.
volume two is internal adventures, basically getting to understand the character from not from her point of view, but from maybe how she sees herself.
Yeah, you see the struggle between these two characters. That's where you see Zebulon Cloudpool and William S. Burroughs become kind of more of central figures in this story arc, I think. And they kind of represent the different thought processes, I guess, of of I don't know, modern adults, I guess, modern parents, like, and kind of how they would look at how to approach something like that. And there are strange choices for you, Chris, to choose those two as the representations, but
What did we do? So in volume two, that's right. So we kind of she was struggling between being guided by Zebulon Cloudpool, which was the sitcom television, that was sort of like their reiteration of Danny Tanner, and William S. Burroughs, who's definitely a little more perverse and alternative in his way of thinking. So she was kind of like she was caught in between the two of them and being guided by them.
Okay. So volume two reaches whatever conclusion it reaches. And then you have to think
What do
about
we?
volume three. So
So
this
in
one's the one
volume,
that's now on sale, right? So let's give people in the next, 5 to 8 minutes a good reason to check this out.
yeah, that's right.
volume, yeah, there it is.
There it is.
Yeah, right there.
Alrighty. Zip through it. What's going on?
Well, at the end of volume two, Zebulon Cloudpool has established himself as the primary thought processor, as the primary being to major trauma. So major trauma now becomes major Zebulon at the end of volume two. And
Okay.
so after she reawakens from being unconscious, because she was zapped to become unconscious in volume two. After she reawakens as Major Zebulon. And she establishes the tubeways as now the whizways. And she starts to do, and she pirates sort of like a new frequency to be able to explore a new game show of the Space Auditorium. Rather than having prisoners, she's now just doing weird and bizarre kind of like entertainment now for the masses out there in the galaxy. So she's kind of pirated the Space Auditorium and turned it into her own thing. And we have this bizarre game show in which we have our sumo wrestler in space. His name is Roast Beef, and he's doing was he's having to He's
It's
they
like
have him on
Don't
the
give too
Jap
much
gigantic.
away.
it's like if you think about like the Japanese game shows where they have people just
Yeah,
like doing these
yeah.
ridiculous acts
Ah,
and basically in something like that.
okay.
Yeah, they have him on top of a giant ramp where, one of those scooters, those little skinny scooters. He's gonna roll down the ramp on this scooter, and he's dressed up in a lobster costume, just because we thought that would be funny if we put roast beef in a lobster costume. And then he's being pelted with inflatable fruit, not actual fruit, but inflatable fruit.
How does she derive income from this?
Everybody's just like, what is this?
Okay, certainly a novelty game show.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
So does that continue to be the theme throughout three? She's finding her own way? Is that kind of
Absolutely not. That's just the way
oh,
that it begins with volume
okay.
three.
So what is
Then
your
the
overarching theme for volume three, if I may ask?
volume three, then after that happens, the Whizways then become infiltrated by this extremist or group of revolutionaries. They call themselves reactionaries because they're reacting to the status quo of a galaxy ruled by the Stoans. And they call themselves Fatso, which are fighters against the Stoan overlords. And Fatso is ruled by or governed by Commander Oracle. Now, Commander Oracle is also somebody who comes from sitcom television. Maybe you guys can make that connection. And he has his group of militants, which also pose as a ska band, then too. So they pirate airwaves and they send out their brand of justice through as a ska band and music. And they take over the Whizways they steal the Whizways from Major Zebulon in order to use the Earth in order to create a giant doomsday weapon that they're going to use in order to destroy the Stoans.
Hmm, ambitious. And Dave,
Ah.
you get to draw all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely coming to like an epic head, and there's a lot of like in this book in particular, a lot of group scenes with lots of robots marching and like and aliens and big battles, and so it was a lot of detail in this book, but I think at this point I've kind of found my rhythm and my style and how I kind of create these visuals, and so I have my bag of tricks on doing it, and I feel like this book though. Really kind of find my groove with the art and the style to portray the really odd visuals. I mean, it's just like you've heard some of the things he was describing, and so it's a lot of fun to kind of create these sumo wrestler in a lobster suit riding a razor scooter, getting pelted by fruit.
I can't believe some of the stuff we're describing then too. We probably sound like we're absolutely
No.
kids.
Loads of fun.
And that's what makes the Space Auditorium fun. I really have to sink into a different mindset when I'm doing this stuff. I certainly have a zany and bizarre side to myself, but not all my writing is like this. I like to explore drama at times then too when it comes to my screenwriting. So, but when it comes back to, and Dave and I work on the Space Auditorium in segments. So when we return to it, we always kind of have to sink ourselves back into that out of that crazy mode.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you said earlier when we were talking before we started this that you're figuring that book four will, in fact, bring it to some sort of resolution. Even if you go beyond
Yeah.
that, this particular story arc will kind of conclude with the fourth book.
So the volume three, we were hoping to be able to conclude the Space Auditorium with volume three, but we introduced so much in that volume where it's like, oh my gosh, if we're gonna do that, we're gonna have like 100-page volume three, and so we decided to break it up into two volumes. So volume three is just sort of like the part one of this conclusion.
Ah,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
righty. Where will people be able to go to acquire these interesting items?
They can get them from our website, www.spaceauditorium.com.
And that's
Uh,
Odditor, right?
yes.
Yes.
Auditorium as an oddball. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yes, you can go there. We have a store. You can order online. I'll personally be packaging and shipping it out to you.
We lost your voice, Dave.
Oh,
There you come back.
is he back on? Okay. Well, are you back on, Dave?
He's not.
Oh,
Chris,
okay.
you want
Well,
to
we
take this?
have our website is the www Space Auditorium, all one word, and you can order from there. And we have all three of the volumes plus other additional stuff, posters, stickers, and other
Merch.
things, for the Space Auditorium.
Dave, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
he's back.
Oh, there we go. I'm back.
Okay. All right. Social media.
Mhm.
Oh.
What's that?
You don't do social media.
I
Am I
do a
still
little
here or no,
social
I'm
media,
gone
but I'm
again?
not
Aren't
too
I?
heavy on social media. I'm
Yeah, I'm
I'm
gone.
I'm still sort of like of the Facebook era, so I have my own Facebook page, but it's primarily
I'm
for friends
completely
and
gone.
friends and family, and I do some comic book stuff related to that. We also have a Space Auditorium Facebook page then too. Um,
I
I
think
guess if
Dave is
anybody
oh,
wanted to be
there
able
he
to
is. He
reach
was
me,
frozen for a minute. I think
Okay.
you have a bad
Yeah.
connection, Dave.
Yeah,
So
I must have some bad connection going on. That's strange. I don't know what's going on. Sorry about that.
it's okay. All right. So there is some
your
social media.
social media, Dave.
Oh, okay. So most of my stuff will be I have a website, davelawart.com, which will have links to Space Auditorium as well. If And then I have Instagram, and my handle on Instagram is it's Dave Law, so ITS Dave Law. And I'm also on Facebook. If you look up Dave Law Art, I'll be there as well. Um, and yeah, this is probably the main places where I will post things and add information about where shows I'll be at, and that's also where you could get our books. I'll be at Dragon Con, LACC, Rose City Comic Con. Am I forgetting something?
Eh, post it on your website. People will be able to
Yeah.
see it there.
Yes, they'll all be there, and they always do
Okay.
post it and update it on
All righty.
Instagram.
All right. Do you have any time frame for book four? Have you even thought about that yet?
That's
Well,
Chris' question.
we made the mistake of kept on saying, okay, book three is going to be out in 2023. Oh, now it's going to be 2024. And it's kind of like we didn't get a chance to be able to release book three until probably like 2025. And we released it here just recently in March at WonderCon. Um, we are probably about halfway through with book four right now,
Okay.
but Dave and I, we kind of work on it piecemeal at a
Hmm.
time. We've got life, we've got jobs. I've got a day job that I have to continue to do. Dave has other projects. I have other projects that we work on. So, it's something that we're going to continue to work on and continue to do. We're hoping to be able to get it out in 2026, but no guarantees.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both for being here, and I'm going to encourage people to check this out. It's interesting. It's extremely interesting. It's worth a look. So, um, I also want to encourage people, if you enjoy this interview, say so. Hit that like button, subscribe, share. Because the only way we're going to build this channel is by people letting other people know that it exists. So, any last words, any last thoughts, Chris, Dave?
Oh, thanks for having us, Dennis. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure
Well,
talking to you.
thank you for being